why China is supporting Russia, in what way it supports Russia, and what's the consequence. As David Hume once said, our actions are directed more by feelings than by reasons. The communist ideology was given to the Chinese by Russians and from Russia. Mao thought the Hungarian Revolution, he could use the opportunity to take the leadership from the big brother. In that time, actually, literally, in all the Chinese documents, when they talk about the Soviet Union, they always Soviet big brother. 49.3% of Mr. Biden's 22 million followers are fake. As the only superpower, you have one job. Your job is to stop the war.
Right.
The Biden administration did not. Instead, they gave Ukraine whatever weapon they could think of.
Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host 𝙒𝙖𝙩𝙨𝘼𝙥𝙥. After a gap of few weeks, we have with us Sasha Gong, and we're going to take a little bit of a step back and look at the Russia-China relationship and also how China sees the future as well as the present in terms of, which country is on the ascendancy, which one is, on the descendancy, and so on and so forth. This is perhaps a unique perspective that we are presenting. And Sasha, being a China watcher for so many years, is in an excellent position to give us that view and perspective. So let's welcome Sasha Gong. Sasha, namaskar again. The last one is doing great guns. We are doing extremely well. The video is really piqued the people's imagination. So let's hope that we have another gangbuster of a session. So Sasha, I'm going to start by putting up the PowerPoint presentation whenever you're ready for it. Maybe if you want to give a preamble before that, please feel free.
Yeah, well, the war is the big item, we all know. Now, with Ukraine and Russia are having a major war, which, pushed the whole world to reorganize. And for so far, people paid most attention to Russia and America, Russia and Ukraine, and the NATO. But not much attention was given to China and Russia. Why China is supporting Russia, in what way it supports Russia, and what's the consequence for the future. And that's something I want to discuss. I'm no expert of Russia, but I think I grew up in China, and in a way, I grew up in Russian literature. And I'm in the same generation of the Chinese current leaders. So I think I might be able to explain what's their feelings, what they think. Usually feelings, as David Hume once said, our actions are directed more by feelings than by reasons. So I want to explain the reasons and what the Chinese think.
That's a great start. And let us start by putting up the PowerPoint. So This is the slide one, Russia and China, Xi Jinping and of course, Putin. So let's take it away.
Yeah. So, and to understand that, I would like to talk a little bit about history to begin with.
Yeah.
Without history, we can't understand whatever happens. So it's a Russia-Chinese Russo-Sino relations. And well, let's drop the previous relations, like I don't want to go back to the Qing dynasty, Peter the Great, whatever. Let's start with the communist ideology. The communist ideology was given to the Chinese by Russians and from Russia. So Chairman Mao used to say that the October Revolution, the gunfight of October Revolution brought us Marxist, Leninist, and gave us communism. So that's how important. Of course, we all know all the way up to its collapse, Russia was the big brother in the communist bloc. But China drifted away from Russia. Before we talk about that, we also need to talk about what the relationship between the two communist parties, the two communist giants. And first, you see, after the Russian Revolution, sent a bunch of international communists. In that time, they called Comintern. 1924, there's Russian communists or Soviet communists set up a communist international called Comintern. That's the short term. And several major Comintern figures went to China. They went to China to help to organize the Chinese communist movement. So in that case,
when was this? Which year?
1920s.
1920. Got it.
So the Chinese Communist Party was set up in 1921. So in the 1920s, 23, 24, at that time, China had already overthrown the Qing dynasty. China was a republic. The party heading the China Republic was KMT, a Kuomintang. And at that time, Kuomintang was very pro-Russia and in a way pro-communism. So Communist Party of China and the leading party, Kuomintang, had some cooperation at that time for a few years. And Russia sent their expert to China. One of the major guys China sent was from India, whose name is Roy.
Right.
Yeah. So he was one of the leading figures for Comintern in China.
So one question, was Sun Yat-sen still alive when all this started in the Kuomintang, or was it under Chiang Kai-shek?
Oh yes, Sun Yat-sen was still alive. Sun Yat-sen died in 1924, 25, the 24, okay. I believe. And but Sun Yat-sen initiated the alliance. Chiang Kai-shek did not break up with the Communist Party until 1927.
I see.
So there are a few years of honeymoon time, and the Comintern people were very active in China. So their goal, of course, is to turn China into communist. And fast forward come to, after that, Chiang Kai-shek tried to crush the communists. The communists went to the Long March and all the 30s. Fast forward to the Second World War, Japanese invasion. The Chinese communists were hidden in the rural areas, including Xi Jinping's father. That's the area Xi Jinping's father was one of the founders. In the end of the Second World War, before the Japanese surrender, the Communist Party also throw their forces into the war. By the end of the war, in August 8, 1945, one thing people may not remember is that the Soviet Union remained its diplomatic relationship with Japan during the entire wartime. Unbelievable. They just did not want Japan to attack the Soviet Union from the east. So diplomatic relationship remained to almost the last minute. After the victory in Europe, in August 8, after Truman bombed Japan, the atomic bomb, and the Soviet Union immediately sent its force to Manchuria, which is the northeast part of China. Japan occupied Manchuria since 1931. So the Soviet Union sent its troops there and robbed everything. They took away all the factories, and they even took away railway trails and took back to Russia and wrecked the entire area. And when the Japanese surrendered a week later, on August 15th, Japan surrendered. After Japanese surrendered, the most, I would say, powerful Japanese troop was in the northeast area. And that troop surrendered to the Russian army, the Russian Red Army. The Russians took away their weapons and everything and gave that to Communist China, the Communist Party. That became the foundation of the Chinese took over. And not only the weapons, they also gave the troops, and makes part of the Japanese troops join the communist troops, including 3 very famous divisions formed by Koreans. At that time, Korea was also Japan's colony. So the Koreans had 3 divisions in the Japanese army in Manchuria, and that military force was transferred to the Communist Party, which later became a major part of the Korean War. When China sent its troops, it sent the Korean divisions first because they speak Korean.
Question. So at that point, Korea was united, wasn't it? At the time of Second World War.
No, Korea was part of Japan, was Japanese colony. 1945, when America and planned pro-war period, and a captain in MacArthur's staff, and simply took a pencil and said, well, in that case, we have to give the Soviet Union some part and remain some part. Just took a pencil and draw a line, 38 parallel. That it's it's very hard to imagine how history developed, and that's how history developed. And he drew a line, and that became the line. That is still the line today. It determined millions of people's lives. So the communists took the weapon and forces and fought the KMT, a civil war, starting from Manchuria and all the way south. Stalin at that time, Joseph Stalin, wanted the Chinese to stop at Yangtze River, so China could become two nations. One would be headed by KMT and would be pro-America. The other part, the northern part, would be pro-Russia. And Stalin did not want China to be that united, to unite, and it became his rival. Anyway, so when Stalin's order arrived China, Mao said no. And Mao wanted to unite China, so he kept attacking and united China. So China became communist in 1949, and the PRC was established on October 1st, 1949.
So one question, Sasha. Sorry, this is the more critical part. So the KMT did not have the arms and ammunition to counter the Chinese Communist Party. Is that what led to Chiang Kai-shek to jump to Taiwan?
No, actually they did. They had all the American equipment. You just think of what happened in Afghanistan or what's happening. America supplied them huge amount of weapons, huge amount. So
and how did they manage to lose it?
Well, corruption and loss of people's support. For one thing, America has a special talent to support corrupt regimes who claim to be democratic. It's a tragedy. That's another issue we can discuss. I'm not saying America, well, I'm American. I'm all for America. The problem is that in terms of America, of empire building or supporting, in terms of international policy, America is still very naive in a way. America is idealistic and naive. Their naivete drove America to do a lot of stupid things in the world. What can I say? Including today.
Yes.
Including what's happening today.
Yes. So let's get back to the PowerPoint. So please continue. I'm sorry for the disruption.
Oh, no. Those are important discussions. And anyway, so when China was first established, the Communist Party had no money, had no international relations. It was poor. It desperately needed international support. So in that time, Mao, how ambitious he was, he desperately needed the support of the Soviet Union. So Mao traveled to the Soviet Union, traveled to Moscow. Mao wanted money. And Stalin, on the other hand, Stalin wanted land, wanted, whatever the imperialists wanted, harbors, ports, and railway, whatever. Stalin wants all those things. Mao, of course, did not want to give. And Stalin, so Stalin actually let Mao, met Mao once and okay, let him stay, and refused to meet him again. And then guess what Mao did? Mao stayed in Moscow, not leaving for a couple of weeks, not leaving. Finally, Stalin had to move them, and then the Soviet Union gave China $300 million low interest, low or no interest, almost no interest loan for 300 million. At that time, it was huge money. Now today it's nothing, right? So Mao got the money and went back to China, and per Mao's request and Stalin's willing, the Soviet Union sent in all kinds of experts to China to rebuild China after the model of the Soviet Union. That was in the early 50s. But at that time, Mao's the ultra nationalist in a way in Chinese, and Mao did personally. He did not like Stalin. The two dictators never like each other in a way. So, and in that time, it's a very interesting piece of history if you want to go into the details, but we don't have that much time to go to the details. Anyway, so after Stalin's death and Khrushchev, after de-Stalinization in 1956, and Mao thought it was time for me to grab the leadership or the communist world. So remember in November, I think first in August 1956, the Polish workers had a riot in Poznan. And then later in November, the Hungarian people rebelled.
Right.
And, that's 1956 at that time. Mao thought the Hungarian Revolution, he could use the opportunity to take the leadership from the big brother. In that time, actually, literally, in all the Chinese documents, when they talk about the Soviet Union, they always Soviet big brother. That's the exact word. It's not, I'm using official documents. They call big brother. So Mao thought it was his time to become big brother. And in the beginning, Mao actually supported the Hungarian rebellion, believe or not. He said, yes, we need to open up. Remember at that time, the Polish Gomulka went to power, and Hungary and all this, and Soviet tank came in. And so Mao tried to set an example of openness. Ask his people in early 1957, say, hey, everybody speak up and criticize us, and all the criticisms, welcome. So what happens that people naively believe, okay, Mao welcomes criticism. So many intellectuals did criticize. And when Mao looked at these people really criticize me, and then what happened is that he launched an anti-rightist campaign in the summer of 1957. And put millions of people in jail. Many were killed. Millions. And a Chinese government admitted about 2.5 million, but from what we can witness, that would be a lot more. So the Chinese intellectuals will crash, and that at that time, China tried to grab the leadership from the Soviet Union. So what happened is that China then launched a debate with the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, debated the Soviet Communist Party. China launched the attack first. They attacked Khrushchev. They attacked the secret report, which, exposed Stalin's crime. And they said the Soviet Union is going to the route of revisionism. That's the exact term the Chinese use. And China said the communist movement should not go this route. We should follow the original Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist, even Stalin's ideology. We should be more radical than less radical. So the Soviet, Soviet then called the Chinese dogmatism. That was a huge debate between revisionism and the dogmatism. Of course, because of the power, the Soviet Union will control most of the communist parties in the world. Everybody wants the Soviet way, except later one tiny country went away. That's Albania. So China and Albania were the two lonely forces, and Albania using this because Soviet Union, I guess Soviet had his Muslim problems, and the Albanian is a Muslim country, and the Soviet Union did not like it that much, and it was a badly managed country, communist country. So Albania, for the price of going to support China, demanded lots of money from China, and China satisfied their money demand a lot. That was the debate. I grew up in this debate. But one thing, which talking about all this background, the importance of today's leaders. Remember, today's leaders, Xi Jinping, 𝗤𝘂𝘀, and almost everybody, that was their childhood. They grow up there. And they grow up shaped by the debate. And the Soviet Union was a daily word, daily occurrence to people. So what happened is, it's a very interesting term, and I can't find any academic study or anyone wrote about it, but explain a lot of today's China. People in my generation, we grow up. My name Sasha is a Russian name because my father gave me the Russian name, and that was before I had my Chinese name. So that's my generation. And what happened is that later Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. In the Cultural Revolution, everything culturally, music, anything traditional, were banned. Everything Western, music, books, and whatever, everything was banned. If you go into a bookstore, you have 90% of the books are Chairman Mao's work. The other 10% are party works. That's all. That's literally what's in a bookstore. But you think of it, China was sort of, Confucius culture is a sort of a very, people are supposed to internalize their desire. And the Chinese people kind of hold back that kind. In the 1950s, when the Soviet Union had put its influence in China, lots of Soviet literature and the music and all sorts of a cultural product went into China, were introduced to China and translated into Chinese. You have to admit, the Russians write well. The Russians write really well. The Russian composers are amazing. Russian music are amazing. So people who went through the 1950s, especially were born in the 50s, and everybody had lots of influence from Russia, culturally from Russia. So during the Cultural Revolution, when Mao banned everything, and to lots of people, to people who came from intellectual or, sort of upper class background, the Russian music, Russian literature, Russian culture became the only culturally enjoyable stuff to them. That's illegal as well. They're all banned. But for upper class people, they are available. In a way, I grew up listening to musicians like Tchaikovsky and all that. So you remember?
How about Rachmaninoff?
Rachmaninoff was not that welcomed, but some music was because Rachmaninoff left Russia in the 1920s. So he was kind of considered a traitor. But Shostakovich was very much available.
Yeah, Shostakovich, right.
And
there's also a pair. I'm trying to remember the name. There's a pair with a hyphen.
Rimsky-Korsakov.
Yes, Rimsky-Korsakov, right.
Yes. So all those are my childhood names, remember. So just imagine my generation, the entire generation, I'm talking about Xi Jinping and all others, that's the bright spot of our youth.
Speaking of Rimsky-Korsakov, in the 1984 Olympics, I think it was IBM, which had a very funny commercial based on that saber dance. So what they are showing is how fast the bobsled is running, and they show that one of the drivers is having a Coca-Cola in his hands, and then the last one is got "Hi Mom" as a all this when they are going speeding down the bobsled. Very funny ad.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so if you think of the whole generation of leadership, a whole generation of Chinese, when they grow up, the whole world is gray or very dark, no color. Mouse world has no color. The only color in their spiritual life is Russian. That is something, very few people dare to recognize today. People don't want to talk about it, and there's sometimes they are ashamed. But one thing revealed what happens, that when Xi Jinping went to visit Russia, and reporters, he was meeting with Putin and they gave a press conference, and reporters asked him what kind of books you like, Russian books. He named 2 books. Well, I guarantee half of, or even most of, Russian people would not know unless they grow under communism. The 2 very communist books. And one is actually written about the war in Ukraine in the 1920s. And that book is, like, translated literally, is how steel is forged. And every Chinese in our generation remembered many famous lines from that book. But the Russians, after the war, after 1957, but they abandoned those things. So there's some things that's why Xi Jinping tried very hard to please Putin. When you see several times he visited Russia, he was trying so hard to show he loves Russian cultures. He loves this, loves that. Although I don't think Xi Jinping is that well educated, but as I said, even if you come from certain upper classes, that was, Russian culture was the bright spot in your youth. So that explained a lot of what the Chinese leaders think of Russia. And then the United States came in 1971, 1972. The United States tried, Nixon's visit, and they put a wedge, and not a wedge, actually the wedge was there, the split was there for a long time, and so the Chinese suddenly discovered the United States of America. So, wow, great. But culturally, the Chinese, if you ask them to choose between, Russian music, Russian songs, and a jazz, for example, the majority of Chinese would choose Russian music.
Yeah.
That's, I'm both. I love both, but perhaps I have been in the States for so long.
Right.
Appreciate
We acquire a new taste. Right.
Yes. But if you look at that, the cultural background. So when United States came into China, the United States actually swept the Chinese by their feet. So, wow, that's a very rich, powerful country, great system, democracy, freedom, and that actually stirred up the Chinese imagination. Except one thing, culturally, China has a long culture, Russia has a long culture. I talk to my Russian friends and the Chinese friends. Culturally, the United States of America is a child compared to the old country.
Yes.
And one thing also, the U.S. it's very hard for the U.S. to relate to, like, my generation, Chinese and Russia, because in our lives under communism, our lives in that time are full of pain. You always hear pain from Russian music, for example, Russian songs, Russian music, pain and desperation and love and very deep. And the Chinese appreciate that. America is sort of present you an easy life.
Yes, yes.
And so that's some cultural understanding I think America needs to pay attention to. And then let's go to the next subject, right?
Yeah.
I think I have been talking a little too much on that part. The next slide up is China and Russia in the age of globalization. Well, of course, there are a lot of subjects to talk about for this. And I just want to stress a few things which are important to understand today's China, US, and China-Russia relationship. Here is that, the Chinese has a reform starting from the late 1970s. The reform they call a market reform. But China, one thing is the Chinese leadership, as I say, never, ever, ever wanted to take the route of democratic reform. They appreciate the free market system, but they think, they can control it better. And the Chinese upper classes, they don't trust ordinary people. And to the Chinese, to a lot of Chinese, if not the majority of Chinese leadership, they think if their vote equals to someone who, like their servant, it's a ridiculous thing. In a way, what you see in China is the Chinese reform is very, very controlled. And controlled in terms of we take your economic development model, market economy, but we reject your political system and we also reject your many cultural aspect. So what you see today's China is a very strange mix of that. And China at that time, I remember even in the 80s when the reform just started, and the Chinese appreciate more like Singapore or other models without democracy, economic development without democracy. And culturally, the Chinese said, we don't want to be westernized. Especially the Chinese Communist Party is that they don't want to be westernized. And come to Xi Jinping, you see that in recent years, what Xi Jinping did was Xi Jinping tried very hard to wipe out the Western cultural influence. And he especially, and his people who are backing him, they don't want China to be westernized culturally. It's very important because that comes to the comparison of Russia. If you look at Russia, the Russian communism, the Soviet Union collapsed in December 26, 1991, right? But even before that, when Gorbachev launched its glasnost in 1985, the Soviet Union they were not that keen to adopt Western economic model, if we remember it correct. Empty shelf, but they are more keen at that time to Western political models and cultural models. In a way, if you look at Russia, what we know about Russia is that since Peter the Great, since early 18th century, Russia wanted so much to be part of Europe. Yes. And Peter the Great ordered his entire court to be westernized or Frenchnized in a way, cut their beards and do this, do that, and we need to look more Western. So eventually, if you look at Catherine the Great, look his court and the taste, she's German, of course, she was German, but the entire court taste, it's more European then.
Yes, and yes. Even Romanovs are all Germans, right? Romanovs are all Germans.
Oh, yeah, they're all Germans. Yeah. But, the way, if you look at Russia culturally, Russia really wants to be part of Europe. And in
Yes.
Russia, I remember I read books I read is that if you tell Russians they're Asian, you'll be very angry for a long time. Well, I don't think they're angry anymore because Europe changed, Russia also changed. But
So if you draw a line somewhere like where the Asian part of Russia and the Western part of Russia meet, some sort of a line in terms of population as well as size, do you have some numbers for us?
I can only grab from my mind, but the majority of the population is in the European part. If you think of the line between Asia and the Europe, is the Ural Mountains.
Yeah.
And so the majority of the population, especially the majority of the Russian population, are in the European line, European side. And also the Asian side, more Siberia, and you have other, nations there. Anyway, but for a long time, Russia wants to be part of Europe. So if you compare Russia's reform since Gorbachev and China's reform since Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese focus on economy, the Russia focus on political reform. So if you look at even before the collapse of Soviet Union, after 1989, the Eastern European change, Russia held its first true democratic election in March 1990. And if you look at that election, well, I talked to a few people who got elected. It's a true democratic election, which means in a lot of places the communist leadership were kicked out. So the most important one is actually the election in Lithuania. And in Lithuania, Lithuania was at that time part of Russia. But in March 1990, non-communist parliament, or in that time called Supreme Council, was elected. And they elected their first head of state, 𝙒𝙗𝙤𝙤 Landsbergis, who I interviewed and I really like. I had a long conversation with him. Anyway, so he was a musician, an anti-Soviet musician. So under his leadership, immediately after the new parliament was sworn in, they voted on independence, and everyone except 6 representatives voted for independence.
And the 6 were the communists?
Yeah, the 6 were communists. So that became the first brick fell of the Soviet Empire. So if you compare Russia and China, Russia, because Russia tried to be part of Europe, and Russia took a very radical step to be democratic. And economy, not much. So that's why it explains why Chinese economy took off, because of, in a way that it's a different issue. We can talk about it otherwise, otherwise it will take a whole day here. But Russia and China, if you look at whole globalization run, China took advantage of globalization and built itself as the second largest economy in the world from a very poor country. And Russia, on the other hand, the economy failed miserably. Remember in the 1990s, during the Yeltsin time, and the Western economists, one of I actually knew was Jeffrey Sachs from Harvard, and they told Russia to have the shock therapy, which means you privatize everything and one step you came from socialism to capitalism. So what happened is that destroyed Russia's economy. Remember in that time, and Russia used to produce this or that in Eastern Europe, and now they have to. In that time, I remember in the 1980s, ruble to US dollar, it was like 0.65 ruble to $1. It
Wow.
was sort of a man-made, it's because they could not really exchange the money. So
Right. Right.
the Russian government set it high, but ruble fell like hell. And the whole economy failed. So in that time, the Russians, I talked to a Russian economist, they said, well, what shock therapy? It's shock without therapy. Lots of people lost their pension, people lost a lot. Lots of people lost everything. That actually brought back to the Communist Party, which became Yeltsin's most powerful opponent. And without the United States, without the help from United States to boost up Yeltsin, he would lost the 1996 election and communists would have won, or nationalists, something like that. So if you look at Russia, when Putin got, because of the economic failure, Russia, took its, well, in that time, Russia had all this oligarchy because during the shock therapy, the state is open for looting. Oligarchy, oligarchs, they just took the state money. There's tons of stories, and if anyone's interested, there are many, many books to read, how the Russian economy, shock therapy failed, how a very small group of people robbed the country, looted the nation, and many people lost, especially the pensioners. Anyway, so when Putin got back, he had not much choice but to turn into Russia's strengths. Like, well, first thing, of course, if Russia may not have the industry much, but Russia has natural resources, gas, minerals, and land, which means grain. So the Russian economy totally rely on oil and gas and mineral and that became Russia. And in a way, I think the Russians are very frustrated for not being able to join Europe. Putin wants us to join NATO. Of course, he was rejected. And well, the funny thing of Russia-China relationship at that time was China, the generation, Xi Jinping, and especially Xi Jinping, they tried very hard to please Russia. They still, in a way, the Chinese thought Russia was the big brother there. And Russia was culturally big brother and historically all this. So if you look at in the past 10 years, Xi Jinping went to Russia a few times and Putin went to China. And the attitude of the two people, it's also widely reported. And Putin always behaved like his big brother. And Xi Jinping tried very hard to please him until last time, until February this year during the Olympics. And if you look at the pictures and all this came out, Xi Jinping looked like the big brother. Putin looked like he's begging for something. It's just very, very amazing when I watched all this. And if you look at Chinese, the second largest economy in the world, China, it's not only the size of the economy, it's the capacity of production. And what China desperately needs today, China needs energy, China needs grain. China is 30% of China's food rely on import. And China needs minerals because China doesn't have that much. And that's exactly what Russia had. So I think the smart foreign policy principle, like Henry Kissinger and America policy, should be, drive a wedge between Russia and China. I'm talking about the American interest. I'm not talking as a Chinese. I'm talking as American.
Yes.
Yeah. So in a way, if you include Russia into the West, into Europe, or into the West, I think that's what exactly Mr. Trump, President Trump thought. Well, we need to get Russia to our side. Otherwise, you'll get to China's side. And the most stupid thing, in my view, for the US to do is to push Russia to the China side, which is what happened. And I'm speaking this affectionately as an American, and I want my country to be, well, to take the leadership. Yeah, go ahead.
So one question, Sasha. What is it that Biden hates about Russia? Because right from the moment the Democrats came to power, they have been in a very, very anti-Russia, policies. Why did Biden hate Russia so much?
In my view, it's not even about money. People always say follow the money. Here, I would say follow the scandal. Think of since 2016, what we see is the Zimmerman prior here. The Democrats, Hillary Clinton and Democrats has been building a rhetoric, a hatred towards Russia. This comes from their hatred to Trump. So Russophobia is something they can easily whip up. Think of it. Remember Obama? Remember Hillary in that time, how friendly they were to Russia?
Yeah.
And if you trace it back, that why the 180-degree turn?
Right.
The only very apparent reason, it's a twisted psychology. They have to justify it. They have to justify the Russia Gate. They have to justify they spent 3 years to damage to a president, to undermine the vote of American people using Russia Gate, and they have to paint Russia as a villain. Without that, they don't have a case. Now,
so what you're saying is the 2017 and 2018, the first 2 years of Trump era was heralded by stubborn opposition on part of the Democrats who tried to make it look like Russia helped Trump steal the election. Again, my perception, I could be wrong, but I'm just saying that, is that what you think happened?
Exactly. I think, these people, for their selfish reasons, for politics, they have been willing to destroy the relationship between the United States and a major power in the world in order to, justify their whatever they need. And it's a very sad thing. And, well, we saw that in medieval time. We just, it's very, think of it, especially since the Second World War. After that, with all this international cooperation, people always try to do diplomacy based on reason, rational diplomacy. And but a lot of time they fail to do so. But at this level, to that extent, to destroy a relationship with a major country, I have never seen it. I have never seen this.
Yeah, and so it's the ego of a few individuals, bonfire of vanities, if you will. I mean, if you can just take those people out, it could be a much more realistic world at this point of time.
Yeah, more than vanity, actually. I think, well, fundamentally, they hated people's choice. They thought, in that way, I think they are closer to the leadership in China. They're closer to the leadership in China. They don't think average America, their vote is carried the same weight as their own vote. So average America, the rednecks elected Trump. They hated that fact. They hated that, people democracy can so easily take the power from their hand. They must destroy it. From all these people, they determined to destroy American democracy, destroy American legal system, to destroy America's relationship, and to reshape the world just for their political needs and psychological needs. is a psychopath.
So, Sasha, tell me this. It's okay for the Democrats to cry uncle about the election being stolen. And when the Republicans do it, they seem to put it down with disdain. How come? I mean, it's the same thing, isn't it?
I don't have any concrete evidence in my hand. I have to speak as a journalist. I don't have it. But, just to see circumstantial evidence. The first time, 2016, 64 million people voted for Trump.
Right.
Second time, 75 million. I don't see any president in history got 11 million more votes in their second term. Mr. Obama got less. Nobody got that many more. I think except Reagan.
That's way back.
Except Reagan. Yeah, way back and compare 19. I forgot the actual number, but I think Reagan reached to that number. Nixon may have something close and something like that. But it's a huge, huge increase. And I don't think Biden, who campaigned from his basement and came out and a few hundred people would follow him, would get that many votes. It's like, recently what we saw in his Elon Musk, the investigation of their Twitter accounts, 49.3% of Mr. Biden's 22 million followers are fake.
I did a monologue on this with all the data. It's doing extremely well. Please go ahead. You're right.
Yeah. So, and remember, Trump, with all the suppression from Twitter, Trump has more than 80 million followers. It's impossible statistically. How come? So, well, if you ask me why, I ask those people why. I'm pretty sure the election is stolen.
So one small clarification, Sasha.
Mm-hmm.
Before he became president, Biden's account was Joe Biden, and that had only 3.5 million subscribers. So it's not even a contest. Let's not even go there. It's not even a contest. You're not in the same universe. Forget about election.
Right. Exactly. So, things have to make sense. And my life lessons that if something doesn't make sense, it must be a different reason. So we have to look at those. But anyway.
Yes. So let's get back to our
back to our.
Yeah.
The next one, the world order. We're talking about the world order in the eyes of Putin and Xi. I have been studying, both men's speeches. It's quite interesting. And what does Putin see in the world? Have you read his speech before the war? Before the...
No. You're talking about the Presidium thing?
It's a 55 minutes TV speech. He explained the war to the Russian people.
Okay.
And something struck me, his tone. Something struck me, usually a national leader before war, when you speak, you sort of instigate people, you sort of chest pounding, look like a big guy and optimistic and that sort of thing. No, Putin's speech sounds like a complaint. That actually interests me a lot. He sounds like the West treats his nation and himself unjustly and all this, the complaints. It's a very odd tone for a leader who's about to launch a war. I'm not saying I think the war is a stupid thing. I always think most war are very stupid things to do. But the tone he talked about, he said he was correcting the mistake made by the communists. In a way, lots of people now, in the West, ignorant people compel Putin that he's Stalin, he's Hitler. And I'm interested to know if anyone, any major journalist or something, no, Putin was very anti-communist. And the people said he tried to go back to Stalin. No, he was trying to go back to Alexander the Great. No, not Alexander, Russian, Alexander first, I would say, the one who established the Holy Alliance in Europe after the Napoleon War. Anyway, that's another Russian history lesson. Well, I'm not getting into. And Putin is very much a nationalist, like most world leaders. They got to be, right? But the way he talked about one thing, he talked about the Soviet Union. You see, Soviet Union was supposed to be a republic. He said, well, you have different countries and supposed to be a federation. But it was not a federation. It was a central government, an empire. So in that time, you look at what the Russians, the Soviet government did. If you look at other former Soviet states, Soviet Union, because Russia is so vast, so the Soviet central government tried to, well, actually did cut small pieces or sometimes large pieces of land to all this republic to make them look bigger, make Soviet Union look like a more balanced, and especially after the Second World War, Belarus and the Ukraine, when the UN started, Russian insist to have 3 votes: Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine. And so Russia needs to boost the size of those countries, right? So Russia gave the part of Poland, which Russia, Stalin and Hitler made a pact, and Russia took half of Poland from Poland, and then later Russia gave very vast major part of East Prussia to Poland to compensate Poland. And that was actually a very brutal move. After the Second World War, I wonder why nobody was writing about it, because they just drove away, they ethnic cleansed the German population in that area. And well, anyway, I'm not getting into that as well. So they gave western part of Poland to Ukraine, the eastern part of Poland to Ukraine. They also gave Crimea, 1954, to Ukraine. The Crimea actually was taken by Potemkin to Catherine the Great, right? And it was not Russian, it was Tatar. So the Russians actually did the ethnic cleansing in Crimea to move the entire Tatar nation to Siberia and took that land, and then it became major Russian. One of the butchers who did Russia's work and killed a lot of Tatars was a Hungarian guy called Béla Kun. Anyway, that guy was later shot by Stalin. Anyway, so it's a lot of very, very bloody history, very, very bloody history. And the sad thing is that I think American diplomats and Americans largely don't know that history. Well, in my way, I'm a historian educated in China. I have to read lots of those histories, and that's also in my interest. So, and this war, I brought back lots of memories to me. I just think, yes, Jesus Christ, I read that history. I read this history. Anyway, so in Putin's eyes, when come back to it, Putin thought he was a Westerner. He wanted to be part of Europe, but he was rejected. And in Xi Jinping's eye, it's also, that's where they met. Xi Jinping, he wanted to resume Chairman Mao's dream. He wanted to be that big brother. In whatever a new alliance, in the new communist or non-communist, third world, whatever you name that, he wants to be the big brother now. So in Xi Jinping's eye, Xi Jinping said, well, China for 40 years, Chinese economy, China has been going towards the Western type of economy for too long. Now let's get back. Let's get back to communism. So he's very dogmatic. And in this way, the war, Russia was driven out by the West. In the war, Xi Jinping had an opportunity to become Russia's big brother. And then now he's doing that. That's how Xi Jinping sees the new world order. The world order, well, and Russia, on the other hand, I think Putin now doesn't mind if Russia became part of Asia.
One question in all this, Sasha. Do you think Putin invaded Ukraine at the instigation of China, or was it the other way around?
I don't think China had a role in it. My hunch, of course, later historians or investigators may find more, but I don't think China needs that, because China had a lot of investment in Ukraine. And if you look at Ukraine and China's relationship, and also that was neglected by almost the entire media. After Ukraine gained its independence, Ukraine developed a very cozy relationship with China.
Yes,
and
yes.
You see, Ukraine has, besides Russia, Ukraine has the largest number of nuclear physicists and weapons specialists.
Yes.
So if you check, you'll see how many of those specialists are now working in China or have been working in China. Ukraine also sold China its first aircraft carrier, scrap metal, I think, was sold it as scrap metal, and China built based on that. China got the technology and built its first aircraft carrier.
What we are seeing is a very interesting situation in the sense, Ukraine gives away all its nuclear missiles to Russia in exchange for a non-aggression treaty, which Russia broke. But after it did that, it went and built the Army, Navy, and Air Force, at least in a big way, because they had all the designs for China, which now hates US. And now that Russia has invaded Ukraine, US has gotten back to helping Ukraine defend itself. I mean, I'm losing my mind here.
I know every sane people would lose their mind. And also, here comes India. I think Prime Minister Modi refused to condemn Russia.
Yes.
And India rely on Russia for its weapon systems. Am I right?
Right.
Yeah.
So India has majority of its weapon system from Russia, especially the serious stuff, the tanks, the submarines, MiG fighter aircraft. So they can't wean themselves off of Russia so easily. And they've tried this piecemeal, like they went and bought some from the French. But putting all together, the Lego blocks don't fit. That is where the challenge is for India.
It's very mind-boggling. You're looking at a new world order is forming, and that's come to our last slide. Then
yes.
Yeah, a multipolar world. And if you think of it, for a very long time after the Second World War, you have two superpowers, Soviet Union and America, and they compete, and Soviet Union failed. And after that, more than 3 decades, the United States was the only superpower. The United States almost could do whatever, and you could promote its own foreign policy anywhere. Foolishly, I think the United States did not use that opportunity that well. After September 11th, I'm okay with the Afghanistan war, and it's right to take out the terrorists. But Iraq, I don't get it. And remember, before the Iraq war, I had the conversation with Paul Wolfowitz, the designer of the Iraq War. He said there are 3 reasons to launch the war. First, Iraq has oil, has land, and has mine, because Iraq has, unlike other Arab nations, Iraq has a relatively better education system. So I said, that's no
You're talking
reason.
about Jerry Bremer? You're talking to Jerry Bremer? Who were you talking to?
No, Paul Wolfowitz.
Oh, Paul, okay, Paul Wolfowitz. Got it.
Yeah. Well, I had the dinner with him in a friend's house. Anyway, that was before the war. I said, that's no reason, and you can't parachute the democracy to any country, right? Have to have some foundation. Anyway, we stupidly got involved in all this, and then at that time, we needed China as an ally. So what we did was we destroyed our own industries. We rely on China with almost everything. Now, this is what we are facing. When foolishly we again push Russia to the arm of China. Now, that's a very peculiar thing I always thought. A few weeks before the Ukraine war was launched, the Biden government said, oh, Russia will attack Ukraine. Russia will attack Ukraine. We have information. And everybody thought, why? It's foolish. Anyway, but I'm sure they have real intel. At that time, as the leader of the free world, as the only superpower, you have one job. Your job is to stop the war.
Right.
The Biden administration did not. Instead, they gave Ukraine whatever weapon they could think of. And with the new $40 billion aid to Ukraine, now America had given Ukraine more weapons, more money than whatever Russia spent in military spending in 2021. That's
strange.
Very strange. So I would say, who's making money? Who's that? Well, that's beyond the point. But why? Because American diplomats, I would say, all diplomats I knew who experienced the Cold War wanted to, hey, ceasefire, don't fight. Let's do that. Otherwise, the world will be in fire. Somebody stupid who, may get us into the Third World War. Poke the eyes to the polar bear, who has 6,000 nuclear warheads.
True. Well, a lot of food for thought, and I think you did a fantastic job, covering this entire relationship of 3 big countries, and now India is becoming another one, where I'm also hearing now that after the latest meeting in Tokyo between Biden and Modi, first US offered 500 million as aid for arms for India, and now they have upped it to 4 billion. So I don't know what's happening there. And India's annual budget for arms is 40 billion. So if they want to supplant 1 year's budget, that's the number that you have to start with. And I don't know where things are going to lead. But Sasha, thank you so much. We are in a multipolar, bilateral world where each country wants to do its own agreement with the other countries. Again, these things can't last long. We have to wait and see how this plays out. At the end, you will always have one superpower or more than one. We have to wait and see if China is going to be able to, withstand its own internal upheavals that are going on. What I hear now, I don't know how it's true or not, whether it's true or not, whether Xi Jinping is going to be left standing in by the time the session comes, where he's hoping to become, president for life or whatever, boss for life, general secretary of CCP for life. And you have to wait and see. September. So it's not very far away. And so we'll wait and see. But Sasha, thank you so much. And viewers, if you like this program, please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And if you think that there was value in this, please do feel free to donate to us by clicking on the super thanks button. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. Bye.